But the fact checks didn't stop. That was weird. We kept seeing the same fact check again and again. It was almost like, despite endless official clarifications, some people refused to believe the Biden administration. They preferred Russian propaganda instead. And we assume they must be QAnon members. We assume that because Foreign Policy magazine told us that. According to Foreign Policy, QAnon, whatever that is, was frantically disseminating, quote, false claims of U.S. biowarfare labs in. Those labs obviously didn't exist. It was all just another lie from the Russians, who lie for a living.
In the shadows of classified information, he stands as a guardian of transparency, demanding answers to questions that echo in the minds of many.
Considering what's happening in a topic most of us don't know much about because the details are not reported. It was a year ago that every media outlet in the United States, from USA Today to the New York Times, told you it was a dangerous conspiracy theory to believe the US government had ever funded secret biolabs in. The idea was ridiculous. In fact, it was Russian disinformation. And then one day, in sworn testimony, Nuland of the State Department accidentally admitted that it was true. Yes, she said, there are many secret biolabs in. And, quote, we are now in fact quite concerned that Russian troops, Russian forces, may be seeking to gain control of them. Wait a second, you may be wondering. Why does the US government maintain secret biolabs in a primitive country like? Why not Austria? Why you? And why didn't we dismantle and remove these secret biolabs when the war with Russia started? Nobody ever explained that. This show was attacked for asking the question. Now we have learned that actually it is far worse than just biolabs. Not only has the Biden administration been maintaining these labs in the middle of a war, it also has, quote, sensitive nuclear technology in as well. And no, we're not making that up.
Those two things are developed through a field of science called gain-of-function science, where you take an infectious microbe and you amplify its infectivity, or you make it jump species, so it makes monkeys, now you make it kill humans, and you adopt it that way. And there's all kinds of methods, and then you make it immune to antibiotics and to therapeutic and to other therapies. So it's actually the inverse of medicine. For 2,800 years since Hippocrates, doctors have been trying to figure out how to make microbes less infectious and less, and develop antibiotics and therapeutics to do that. Well, the guys who are involved in this, there's 36,000 what are called life scientists, but they're actually scientists who are now employed full-time in developing, microbes that can be used to.
But given the experience we just had 3 years ago, where a virus from a biolab overturned
So let me just finish this brief history about what happened. In 2014, 3 of those microbes escaped. Fauci built labs all over the country, in Galveston and Boston, everywhere. They're BSL-4 labs. We don't even know how many there are, BSL-3 and BSL-4. We have no idea how many there are. There's, we've counted them. I have a new book coming out that goes through the ones we know. But there are many secret ones that people don't know about. And they're doing it here in the United States. But in 2014, 3 bugs escaped from 3 different labs. And they were high-profile breaks, and they were very dangerous things, smallpox and a couple of other bad microbes.
Through the lens of his impassioned investigation, Carlson becomes a relentless seeker of truth, urging us to pierce through the fog of obscurity.
Then the European Union weighed in, throwing its credibility behind the same claim. These are conspiracy theories, the EU told us. They're lies spread by Putin. An EU spokesman then reminded us that, quote, the credibility of information provided by the Kremlin is in general very doubtful and low. That was good to know. Quote, Russian disinformation has a track record of promoting manipulative narratives about biological weapons and alleged secret labs. Yeah, we're not going to do a segment about secret labs in Ukraine. Last thing we want to do on this show is traffic in Russian disinformation spread by QAnon, so we took a pass on that story. And that's where things stood until yesterday, when we happened to tune into a hearing of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Toria Nuland was testifying, so we were interested. Nuland's one of the people who brought us the Iraq War, never apologized for that, and kept getting promoted, because that's how DC works. Tori Newland is now Joe Biden's Undersecretary of State in charge of, and she knows a lot about. In 2014, Tori Newland engineered a coup in the name of democracy, of course. So she is a highly informed source about. So she was having this colloquy with Senator Marco Rubio of Florida during her testimony. And at one point, Rubio took a tack that we were not expecting at all. He asked Newland if he had biological weapons. We never imagined would have biological weapons. Why would you have bioweapons? So it seemed like a pretty strange question. But it wasn't half as shocking as the answer he got.
As the dramatic narrative of hidden biolabs unfolds, Carlson's resonating voice remains a beacon, reminding us that our right to know extends to matters that affect our safety and well-being.
Obama signed a moratorium that shut down the 18 worst of Anthony Fauci's experiments, where most of them were taking place in Galveston and in North Carolina by a scientist called Ralph Barrick down there. And instead of obeying that law, Anthony Fauci shifted a lot of his operations offshore. And those operations ended up, most of them in the Wuhan lab, which is a military lab, and that the Chinese run, the People's Liberation Army. And then a lot of them went to the. So a lot of that science now, and it's funded, Fauci was funding lots of it. But then the other government agencies began to get confidence in, their ability to get away with it. And most of it is being funded by the Department of Defense. Most of all, the biggest single funder is USAID, which is, a CIA cutout.
Do you think the lab leak was a leak or was it intentional?
The best science shows that it indicates that the people who were working on a particular virus technology that was taught by Ralph Barrick, it was developed by the US government with NIH money. It was then taught to a group of scientists, Xi Zhengli, who's famous, the Bat Lady, and then her assistant, Ben Hu, and a couple of other scientists at the Wuhan lab. Barrick taught them two things. He taught them, one, how to engineer the spike with a furin cleave that could attach to the ACE2 receptors of the human lungs and make people sick and spread, through the air.
Does she have biological weapons? It has biological research facilities. What? You mean secret biolabs? Like the secret biolabs definitely doesn't have? It has those? Yes, it does. And not only does she have secret biolabs, Tori Newland said, whatever they're doing in those labs is so dangerous and so scary that she is, quote, quite concerned that the so-called research material inside those biolabs might fall into the hands of Russian forces. Try not to use profanity on the air to describe our reaction. Our jaws drop. Let's leave it there. Under oath in an open committee hearing, Tori Newland just confirmed that the Russian disinformation they've been telling us for days is a lie and a conspiracy theory and crazy and immoral to believe is in fact totally and completely true. So a whistleblower produces a text message showing that Joe Biden was in the room with his son when his son was selling influence to an enemy power, the Chinese government. And ABC's take on it, Joe Biden is a father first, take it or leave it. What accounts for a response like that?
The promises of hope and change that once filled the air have given way to disillusionment and frustration. Tucker Carlson's passionate words cut through the silence, exposing the failures and missteps of the Biden administration, leaving no doubt that the American people have reached their limit. The weight of broken promises and failed policies hangs heavy on the shoulders of hardworking Americans.
So a week before these last midterm elections, Joe Biden's lawyers were for some reason rooting around in a locked closet in the Washington office of something called the Penn Biden Center for Diplomacy and Global Engagement. And while in that locked closet, Biden's lawyers found a sheaf of highly classified government documents.
Tucker Carlson's unwavering voice pierces through the noise, declaring, "Enough is enough, we can't take this anymore," as he holds the Biden administration accountable for its shortcomings. The erosion of freedoms, the disregard for the Constitution, and the erosion of American values have pushed the nation to a breaking point. Tucker Carlson's fierce determination shines through as he boldly proclaims, The time has come to stand up and say, we can't take this anymore.
Well, that's the way you talk when you've got nothing to fear from an upcoming presidential election. You don't even bother to think of an excuse for your candidate because you don't need to. Your country has electronic voting machines. Joe Biden got 81,282,916 votes in 2020, and you're pretty sure he can do it again. In fact, you know he can. You're not worried.
The disillusionment and frustration of everyday Americans rise to a crescendo as Tucker Carlson's powerful words capture the national sentiment. With unwavering resolve, he articulates the collective cry, "We can't take this anymore," and calls for a return to leadership that puts the American people first.
They all said it, quote, "The jobs report suggests the Biden economy is not in a recession," wrote the New York Times. And then, of course, there were other stories like that, too. So on the basis of that and other factors, they won. They now have control of the Senate. And now we get to learn the truth. You weren't supposed to hear that. Joe Biden read the stage directions out loud. That's like eating the garnish that comes with your entree. You're supposed to know not to do that. Joe Biden no longer does. In a year or two, he will be gone completely, and there will be no hiding it. At that point, the Democratic Party will face a secession problem. If Joe Biden is reelected next year and then forced to leave office during his term due to disability, that means Kamala Harris will become president of the United States. And nobody wants that, not even her husband. In real life, nobody likes Kamala Harris. That's not an attack on her. In fact, it's possible to feel pity for someone who's so universally reviled. It is instead an observation of unchanging physical reality like gravity or photosynthesis. Nobody wants Kamala Harris to be president. No one will benefit if she becomes president. So logic suggests there's going to be a change. It's going to have to be somebody else. And whoever that person is going to have to enter the race soon, before the election, after Biden drops out. Who could that person be? We don't know, obviously. This is all just guessing. But we do know whoever that is will have to have two essential criteria. He'll have to be as shallow, ruthless, and transactional as Joe Biden is, and he'll need to have flattery skills that are so polished and advanced they'd be considered superior even in the Saudi royal court. And there's only one man in modern America who fits that description: Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, and perhaps not coincidentally, Joe Biden's new closest friend.